Good morning, sir. Can you see and hear me?
Yes, I can, thank you.
If I may call Mr. Smith.
Yes.
Stand, please. Repeat after me. I do solemnly,
Sincerely and truly,
declare and affirm
that the evidence I shall give
shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth.
and nothing but the truth.
Thank you.
Mr. Smith, my name is Sam Stevens and I ask questions on behalf of the inquiry. Could I ask you to state your full name, please?
Hello, my name's David John Smith.
Thank you for giving your evidence to the inquiry today. I want to turn to your witness statement. It should be in a bundle of documents in front of you, dated 23rd of February 2024.
Yep.
And it running to 98 paragraphs. Yep. Can I ask you please to turn to page 32? As I understand, you want to make some clarifications to paragraph 92.
Yes, that's right. Simple changes, really. When I wrote this, I wasn't able to see the board minutes that gave me the exact time when I took over as Chief Customer Officer and Paula took over as Managing Director. So in here...
When you say Paula, you mean Paula Venables?
Paula Venables, yes, sorry. In here we talk about November, December 2010. In fact, I'm now aware that from the board minutes that Paula took over, I think it was the middle of October. The exact date I think is in that board minute, but around the 18th, which actually means that paragraph is slightly wrong. It should say in around September 2010, it became clear around the direction. And also to clarify that I handed over the day-to-day running to Paula Venables as per the board minute on October the 18th. Otherwise, I'm happy with the statement.
Just as a matter of clarity as well, the last sentence you say, I was still a director of POL board, Post Office Limited board, currently says for 6 or 7 months.
Yes, forgive me, the exact date I think is in the Company's House records, sometime in July, so it's to reflect the exact date I think would be better.
Could I ask you please to turn to page 35 of your statement?
Yes.
Do you see a signature?
I do.
Is that your signature?
It is.
And subject to the clarifications you just made, are the contents of the statement true to the best of your knowledge and belief?
Yes, they are.
That statement now stands as your evidence to the inquiry. I'm going to ask you some statements about it, some questions about it and other matters. Dealing very briefly with your professional background, you qualified as a chartered accountant in 1989.
Yes.
And you joined Royal Mail Group plc in August 2002.
Yes.
Your prior board experience before joining Royal Mail was being finance director at 2 other companies.
Excuse me, yes.
At this point, I think it's probably helpful to try to summarise the structure of Post Office Limited and Royal Mail when you took over as managing director.
Okay, I mean the actual company structure is quite complicated because there are lots of subsidiaries, but in simple terms, there's a group holding company, Royal Mail Group. A subsidiary of that company was the Post Office Group, and underneath the Post Office there were then some individual subsidiaries as well. So my responsibility was as a director of Royal Mail Group, and then also the managing director of Post Office and all its subsidiaries.
So let's go through it in stages. You were a member of the Post Office Limited board.
Yes.
That was there were 2 other group companies I want to ask you about at the time. One was Royal Mail Group Limited, and the other was Royal Mail Holdings plc.
Yep.
And is it right that Post Office Limited was a subsidiary of Royal Mail Group Limited?
I believe so. I can't remember the exact structure, but yes, inside the group it was a subsidiary.
And Royal Mail Group Limited was a subsidiary of Royal Mail Holdings plc?
Yes, I believe so.
Of Royal Mail Group Limited and Royal Mail Holdings PLC, which, if any, board meetings did you attend of those two companies?
I think I attended all of both of them because I was a director of both companies.
And which board of which company was responsible for the group?
It would have been I think it was the PLC board at the top. It's the top holding company.
Thank you. Back to your career. Before joining Post Office, you served as Finance Director of Parcel Force, which was a part of the Royal Mail Group.
Yes.
And between 2007 and 2009, you were Managing Director of Parcel Force.
That's right.
You were appointed as Managing Director of Post Office Limited in April 2010.
Yes.
Prior to joining Post Office Limited as Managing Director, what was your understanding of the culture of management within Post Office Limited?
I didn't really have a strong perception of it. My time was in Parcel Force, which is a very separate subsidiary of the group, doing entirely different things. So the only perceptions I really would have had was the occasional group meetings where the MD of the Post Office and the MD of Parcel Force would have met, which would have been part of the sort of management reporting. But inside the company itself, I didn't really have anything to do with the Post Office before I joined it. So I couldn't really comment on the culture.
It's right, your predecessor as Managing Director of Post Office Limited was Alan Cook.
That's right.
When you took over as Managing Director, did you have a meeting with Alan Cook to discuss the company?
I can't recall the precision of it, but I'm sure we would have had not one meeting, but a number of conversations. I'm sure we would have done.
Please could we bring up your witness statement, page 9, paragraph 21. You say that your role as MD and Company Director at Post Office Limited, was no different to any other CEO or Director role. That can come down, thank you. So whilst this was a different title, Managing Director, did you see your role as Managing Director of Post Office Limited as akin to a CEO of another company?
Yes, in that it was about setting the strategy and direction and resources for the business. That's what I meant by that.
You remained Managing Director of Post Office Limited for, well, we've discussed it until October, start in April and then October 2010. When you joined in April 2010, did you expect your appointment to be a long-term one?
Yes, very much so.
We'll come back to that in due course. Before moving on, I want to talk about some codes and principles of corporate governance. Did you apply or take into account any codes relevant to corporate governance and management?
The structures of the business as the wider group were well established before I joined, so I didn't change anything. But I was well aware, as having been a director of a number of companies, of the general requirements of corporate governance.
To what extent did you pay regard to the Financial Reporting Council's combined code for corporate governance when you were Managing Director of Post Office Limited?
I think I was aware of it through the sort of annual audit cycle, and would have taken counsel, for instance, from the auditors as part of the management letter process as to the controls that were needed and the governance steps that were needed. So to that extent, I was aware of it.
And in your view, were your expectations for the standards of corporate governance in a publicly owned company like Post Office Limited different to your expectations for a publicly listed company?
Yeah, there is a difference. There's obviously the listing requirements from the stock exchange, for example, that lay out clear distinctions in terms of requirements. So I was aware there was a difference, but I don't think I spent a large amount of time thinking about that in that particular period.
Would any of those differences which you understood there to be have affected your executive function as managing director?
I don't know that I thought about that at the time, I'm sorry.
I want then to look at the executive function and the executive team. We've touched on the Post Office Limited board already. In your witness statement, you describe a level down of management called the executive team.
Yeah.
And you chaired the executive team. Is it fair to say that the executive team was responsible for running the post office business?
From a day-to-day perspective, yes.
And the attendees would have included Susan Crichton.
Yes.
You're nodding yes. And at that point, she was head of legal of Post Office Limited.
I think that was a title. I can't be entirely certain, but yes, that was the broad area of her responsibility.
And Paula Venables attended those meetings?
Yes, she did.
Her role was network director?
Yes.
And they all, on the executive team, reported to you?
Yes, I think that's right.
As managing director, would you accept that ultimate executive accountability for the operation of Post Office Limited rested with you?
Yes.
And in your witness statement, you say that the executive team met once a week.
Yeah, I think so. This is vague in time. We would have generally been meeting to talk about day-to-day matters on a weekly basis. We probably met more formally once a month, and that would have been used to inform anything that then went up to the poll board.
Can you just give a précis of what would have been discussed at the weekly meetings?
So it would have been typically maybe we've got a new product launch. Are we ready for it? There's a particular question that's come in that we need to think about or answer from maybe the operation. We might have been talking about the sort of systems rollout that was taking place at the time, because we were looking at that on a daily, weekly basis in my early days. So it's the day-to-day, what needs to be fixed tomorrow, what do I need to be aware of immediately type of things, rather than anything, say, more strategic or long-term.
And just so we're clear, Susan Crichton attended those meetings?
I believe so, yes.
And the monthly meetings within the executive team, were they where the more strategic decisions were made?
Yes, they were more structured. So we would have been, for instance, looking at the financial results for the month, looking at the progress on the change programs in the business. We might have been reviewing investment cases that we wanted to take forwards to the board. So it was definitely more strategic, yes.
And you referred to preparing things to then be taken up to the Post Office Limited board.
Yes.
Who was responsible for the transferring information from the executive team to the Post Office Limited board?
Well, as a combination, we had a company secretary. The agenda would largely be discussed between the company secretary, myself and the chair. And there would have, I believe, have been a set of standing agenda items through the year that we would have expected to look at. For example, health and safety. And so those items would have been collated into an agenda, and then the company secretary would have pulled the appropriate papers together, probably with the help of my own exec assistant.
Just to clarify those, that firstly, the chair and the company secretary, they didn't attend the executive team meetings?
The chair definitely didn't. I'm not sure about the company secretary.
But in terms of who was aware of or on top of the discussions at the executive team level?
Yes.
And what information from the executive team level needed to go up to the board, that was your responsibility?
It would have channeled through me, yes.
Who was responsible for passing relevant information from the operation of Post Office Limited to the parent company?
Well, there are a number of informal channels, but the formal channel was I had a monthly report that would be sent to the group and would be part of the group board pack. And at the board meeting, there would be a standing item where I would talk through the matters that the main board needed to know about.
And the formal monthly channel,
Yes.
which person was that report to?
I would imagine, but can't be certain, it would have been the company secretary of the group.
What were the informal channels?
Well, it was a group matrix. So, for example, communications would talk to the communications team centrally, finance would talk to the finance team centrally, etc. So those informal matrices would sometimes have a hard line into me, sometimes have a dotted line into me, and maybe a hard line into the finance director of the group. But those were what I meant by informal channels.
So is it fair to say that from the executive team you had a responsibility to pass information to the Post Office Limited Board and to the parent company?
Yes, yes.
But there were other lines of communication below you between the Post Office Limited company and the parent company?
Exactly so.
Did you ever find that the corporate structure within the group obstructed or hindered the flow of relevant information through the group?
I'm not sure that I did. The only reason for the pause is as we get to the back end of my time in the group, we are starting to think about the possibility of separating Royal Mail from Post Office, and we therefore started to think about the difference in terms of duties of care that those two groups have got. And whilst I can't pick out a specific example that says here was something that caused friction here, I'm sure that we were aware of that governance change and we're managing our way through it during the sort of later months of my time in the group. But other than that, no.
And it sounds like nothing stands out to you as a particular bit of information that you couldn't get to the relevant part of the group because of the group structure? No. We don't need to turn it up, but in your statement, you refer to one of your responsibilities to make sure that the right control systems were in place for risk management and finance. Would you agree that identifying, analysing and managing risk is a very important part of running a company?
Yes.
Would it be fair to say it goes to the heart of the role of the company executive?
Yes.
What steps did you take on becoming managing director to satisfy yourself that the post office business had identified all relevant risks in its business?
Yeah. The business, like the wider group, ran a formal risk register, put my teeth in, risk register, and also had internal audit functions to review the controls and systems that were in place across the group. I reviewed those systems as part of my induction process, i.e. have we got a risk register, is it covering the right sorts of risks, etc. I also we had a regular process for an audit committee where risks would be reviewed, and we also had a standing agenda to review sort of outcomes of each of the audits each month as they came through the organisation. So there was on that side, and then from a financial side, we obviously had the internal audit teams also looking at finance controls and finance systems, and we also had the external auditors working with us. I had known EY in my previous roles in the business, so was comfortable that the types of audits that they were likely to perform would be sufficient to satisfy our duties. And also met with EY as part of the process for sort of preparations for audit, reviewing management letters, and of the signing of the accounts process itself.
Could you just provide, for the record, provide the job title of Ian Wise?
Sorry.
Did you say Ian Wise?
Ernst Young, yeah. It would,
oh, Ian Wise, sorry.
Yeah, Ernst Young, the auditors.
Yes, I apologise, I misheard you. To what extent did you consult with teams such as the legal department within Post Office Limited when considering the risk register of how to identify risk?
I can't remember exactly how this would have worked at the time, but certainly all parts of the senior management team would have been involved in building the risk register. All parts of the management team, as in the exec team that I was describing earlier, would have reviewed the outputs of the risk register, and so legal, just like all other departments, would have had the opportunity to go through and flag any concerns that they had got. And then we would have discussed what are the mitigants that we can put in place to ameliorate those risks.
With that in mind, I want to move to oversight of prosecutions. In your witness statement, we don't need to turn it up, but you say that you are almost certain that Susan Crichton gave you a briefing on the work of the legal department when you joined as managing director.
Yeah.
And you say that that would have likely included the criminal enforcement work. Can you remember any further detail of the...
I'm sorry, I can't. My induction would have taken place through sort of April of that year. I do know that we set up a fairly extensive induction, so that it was across all parts of the business, not just in the head office, but going out to visit branches, for instance, going out to the cash centres and all of those things. So I do know that that was arranged and organised, but I can't remember the specifics, I'm afraid, of what would have been discussed and disclosed in each of those sessions.
You may have to forgive me for just going through this in stage. I want to ask what you think you knew at the time. Were you aware of the prosecution of sub-postmasters for theft, fraud offences and false accounting when you were managing director?
Yes, I would have been, yes.
And would that have been from the start of your time as managing director?
It would have certainly been in the early days. It may not have been on day one, but certainly as part of that induction process. And also the fact that in the monthly management meetings, we would have had standard reports from each department. And certainly I can remember the legal department would have laid out, these are the current cases that we're working on.
I want to come to those reports in a moment. Staying with what you knew, were you aware that those prosecutions were pursued using data generated by the Horizon IT system?
I don't think I was initially, but certainly I became aware of it. I can't remember when, but I did become aware of it.
At an operational level, who did you think was carrying out the investigations that led to those prosecutions?
I was aware that there were a combination of people involved, but that we had a security function whose day job it would have been to audit the branch, gather the evidence and bring it back into the business to consider what to be done about it.
You said we had an audit function, I think. When you say we, who do you...
As in the Post Office, sorry.
Post Office Limited?
Yes.
And can I be clear, Mr. Smith, when you use the expression we or the expression the business,
yes,
can I take it that you're talking about the legal entity, the Post Office Limited?
Sir, yes, I will try to be clear that if I don't mean that, I will pull out what entity I'm talking about.
Yeah.
But so far, yes, that's
what I'm anxious to avoid is any misunderstanding of crossovers between any part of Royal Mail and the Post Office, if
yes,
you understand. So I'd like you to be precise, if you would.
Yes, okay.
Again, at an operational level, who did you think was responsible for the decision of whether or not to prosecute a sub-postmaster?
I think that I believed that that was the legal team.
Which legal team?
Sorry, under Sue Crichton. I don't recall the structure underneath Sue, but it would have been under Sue's team.
So the Post Office Limited?
Yes,
legal.
yes. Post Office Limited, not Royal Mail.
Again, staying operationally, who did you think was responsible for the conduct of those prosecutions?
Again, the same team.
Now, there's a difference between the conducting a prosecution, investigations, etc., who did you think was responsible for providing legal advice to Post Office Limited on the conduct of prosecutions and investigations?
I was aware that we had a separate external legal firm supporting us. I don't think I knew for certain, but I would have imagined that between the Post Office legal team and any external support that they may have required, between them they would have made that decision.
To what extent did you think that at an operational level, responsibility for any of those matters to do with prosecution lay with Royal Mail Group or Royal Mail Holdings?
Well, in that it was the Post Office Limited was a subsidiary of the group, there's clearly a reporting line and responsibility there, but I was clear that the conduct of all of the decision making lay in Post Office Limited through the legal structure that I described earlier, not at Royal Mail Group.
To what extent did you consider that the Post Office was in an unusual position in that it was the alleged victim of crimes that it was investigating, that it investigated those crimes itself and then decided whether to prosecute them?
I'm sad to say at the time I didn't really reflect on it in the way that perhaps I should have done.
Presumably you accept that when carrying out the conduct of prosecutions, Post Office Limited was responsible for conducting them appropriately and lawfully?
Absolutely, yes.
And as you say, at your executive level, your evidence is that the Post Office Legal Department was responsible for the conduct of those prosecutions. Do you accept that you were ultimately responsible for ensuring that the Post Office Legal Department fulfilled its responsibilities to conduct investigations and prosecutions appropriately and lawfully?
I mean, ultimately, as the managing director of that entity, yes.
And what steps did you take to see that the prosecutions were conducted appropriately and lawfully?
I think the initial conversations with Sue around the induction to the business gave me a flavour and a picture. I think the monthly reporting that came in through that structure to the exec team to review cases, but I didn't go beyond that to review the individual cases and the conduct of the cases.
Please could we turn up your witness statement, page 10, paragraph 24. Now, just before this, we don't need to have it on the screen. You say that you're responding to a question the inquiry asked concerning risk and compliance issues arising from the prosecution of sub-postmasters. And in paragraph 24, you say, as a Crown Office, Post Office Limited dealt with the public money and therefore had a responsibility to protect the public purse. And you expand on that. Towards the bottom, 4 lines up, you say, I cannot recall thinking that any risk or compliance issues arose from Post Office Limited undertaking this role, but with the benefit of hindsight and in light of the wrongful prosecutions, I can see the inherent risks in the prosecutions taking place in-house and not by an independent enforcement authority. That can come down, thank you. What do you consider those inherent risks to be?
I think that the sort of passage of time has shown that conducting the case, gathering the data, acting as the prosecution can lead you to a position where you might not think as independently as you should do about the quality of the information. Have you disclosed everything? Have you presented the case in a balanced way. And I think those kinds of risks are clearly there. I think the other danger is that potentially the balance of probability might be stretched too far in terms of whether to take a case through a legal process or not.
Can I ask you to expand on what you mean by that?
Yeah, so I mean, I think you should only take a case on where you think that, in layman's terms, you're certain of the facts, you're certain of what the case is, you're certain that somebody's guilty. It is possible, I'm not sure that I ever saw this, but it's possible that, you know, that 100% picture might change. You might take a 90% picture or an 80% picture. I never saw that, but that's the type of risk that I was thinking about when I wrote that comment.
Why did it require hindsight to identify those risks?
I think at the time I was not focused on the level of controls, the level of risks associated with what we can now see. That's the issue.
Why do you think that was?
Because if we go back to 2010, as you'll see earlier in my statement, the focus of the board and the focus of the business was actually almost entirely around the separation of the post office from Royal Mail Group, a new party coming in from government, the need to refinance the business, which was fundamental to its long-term existence because it was coming to the end of a funding package with government, and more latterly the Bank of Ireland sort of final knockings of the banking crisis from 2008, and those elements, sad to say, were actually where the board was fundamentally focused through most of the time that I was with the post office.
The fact that you didn't identify those risks at the time, what do you think about that now?
Well, with hindsight, it's obviously very sad because had we identified those risks, we might have been able to put in place better control mechanisms, better inspection mechanisms of governance, and we didn't.
To what extent do you accept responsibility for not identifying that risk?
I certainly think I made part of it. As I said, the structures were there before I came. They were certainly not changed while I was there. And along with the rest of the executive team, we did review the risk registers. We didn't flag this as a potential new risk to think about. But ultimately, I managed that process.
Do you have any insight as to why anyone else in the team didn't identify those risks or present them to you?
No. I mean, it's like all risks in a risk register. If you ask me, was COVID on that risk register? No, it wasn't. You become aware of things, don't you? And then you react to them. And this is one of those that we didn't pick up at the time and should have done.
I just want to be clear about what the should have done means in that context, Mr. Smith. And it's a theme that has surfaced in various forms throughout the inquiry. And if I can put it in this way, the debate between foresight and hindsight.
Yes.
My understanding of your evidence is this, and please correct me if I'm wrong. All the risks which you have elucidated in relation to paragraph 24 were foreseeable risks at the time. However, because there were other, as you saw it, and I'm not challenging you on this for the moment, more important things to consider in the business, they took up your thought processes rather than the foreseeable risks which you've identified. Is that fair?
Yes, I think so.
Yeah, fine.
Thank you, sir. I just want to come, before we move on to a different topic, to the monthly legal reports. You referred to these earlier, and you said that it would include lists of legal cases. Was that lists of all cases that Post Office Limited were involved with in terms of prosecutions?
Yeah, I can't be certain of the detail here because it's a long time ago, but I do recall that, as with all the other departments, they were written out their performance overview of what's happening, and inside the legal one would have been a summary of, I think, each of the cases that they were acting on at that point in time and the status of that, and if we needed to talk about them because they were flagged as there's something that needs to be resolved or an issue here, then they would have been discussed in the meetings.
So you said if we needed to talk about them because
Yes.
of the issue flag. Can you recall any time when you did talk about them?
I'm not certain, but I would imagine that we would have talked about the Seaman Misra case, but I'm not certain.
We'll come to that
Yes, I'm sure.
in due course. So let's focus back on when you arrived. I want to now look at your knowledge of the IT system. It's probably helpful at this point just to cover some terminology. The IT system that was in place used between 2000 and 2010, I'm going to refer to as Legacy Horizon.
Okay.
Following the group litigation use of words, and the version of Horizon that was being brought in when you became managing director, I'm going to refer to that as Horizon Online.
Okay.
In your statement, you say that you were not aware of any bugs, errors, or defects in the Horizon IT system when you joined. I assume that refers to Legacy Horizon.
It actually referred to all of it, because when I joined, I didn't really know anything about Horizon other than it was the system that was used to operate the business.
Did you think that the Horizon IT system would have been completely free of bugs, errors, and defects?
By the Horizon system, do you mean Legacy or?
Well, let's deal with both.
Okay.
First, Legacy Horizon.
So certainly in terms of the legacy system, it had been in for many, many years. I didn't envisage there would be material problems with it at that point, no. In terms of the online system, I was aware that we had been going through pilot very quickly into my tenure, as we'll no doubt discuss in a minute. I was aware that there were problems with freezing accounts, and it didn't strike me as particularly unusual with a new system coming in for there to be a bug of some sort that needed to be resolved.
When you spoke about Legacy Horizon, you referred to material problems. Does that mean there may have been some bugs, errors, and defects that were immaterial?
There may have been, but I didn't think that there would have been anything significant. Let's put it that way.
In your statement, you also say that you weren't aware of complaints about the integrity of the Horizon IT system when you joined.
Yes.
When did you become aware of such complaints?
I can't be certain, but it would have been relatively early on, probably through the briefing processes, but I can't be certain of that.
Can I turn up a document, please? It's UKGI, then there's 6 zeros, 28. So this is a letter. It's from Alan Cook on the 13th of October 2009. That's your predecessor. Sent shortly, well, half a year before you joined.
Yeah, could I have a moment to read it? Because I've not seen this before today.
Have you not?
No.
Yes, of course you can. Please do read it.
Thank you. Could we move on, please? Okay.
Have you read that? Thank you. If we could go back to the first page, please. So we see there's a parliamentary question that's being responded to.
Yeah.
So to ask the Minister of State, Department for Business, Innovation and Skills whether he has received reports of errors in the Post Office Horizon system which have led to postmasters or postmistresses being falsely accused of fraud, and if he will make a statement. And you've read the response that's there. That can come down, thank you. Do you remember if you were made aware of that letter during the process of joining?
Based on the fact I've never seen it before, I don't think so. As I said, more generally, I was made aware of some of the challenges that Horizon had encountered through my briefing into the business, but not the specifics of that letter, no.
I just want to break down those challenges. Are you referring to challenges in legal cases, including prosecutions?
No, I'm really thinking more about I've been made aware of the Computer Week sort of press type of noise that was out there. That's what I'm thinking about.
So are you referring to the article by Rebecca Thompson published on the 11th of May 2009?
I believe so, yes.
And that article reported on allegations by sub-postmasters, at the time allegations by sub-postmasters, that they had been convicted or held liable on the basis of data generated by the Horizon IT system, which they claim was unreliable.
I believe so, yes.
What did you make of those complaints when you first heard about them?
Well, I mean, I obviously asked about why we believed our system was robust and why we were continuing to be successful through cases, the themes of which are not dissimilar to what ultimately came through later in the Rod Ismay report that we'll no doubt get to.
So let's break that down. You're saying you were briefed on these allegations and the complaints, and at that time, at the briefing, you raised questions about how we were certain that the system was robust.
In the round, yes. I didn't. This was not a huge probing exercise to get to the bottom of every single case. This was a, okay, well, why did we think we're okay kind of conversation. And that was as far as it went.
Do you remember the response you were given when asked those questions?
I think it was along the lines of what eventually comes out in the Ismay report. In other words, the system's pretty much tamper-proof. We've got strong audit records. We've got independent security going around checking and balancing. And the court cases that we've held have been largely successful. So it was kind of at that level rather than anything more detailed.
And who told you that?
I think I can certainly remember having conversations with Paula. I think I had conversations, Paula Venables, and I think I had conversations with Susan Crichton as well. But I can't be certain beyond that.
At that point, were you aware of any concerns about how the prosecution... Sorry, I'll start that again. Were you aware of complaints about how investigations were handled by Post Office Limited?
At that time, no, I don't think so. We're talking about April as part of my induction into the business.
Okay, please can we bring up POL 20106867. And can we go to page 3, please? And down to the email midway, thank you. This is an email on the 26th of February 2010, so before your time. It's from Andy Hayward, who was Senior Fraud Risk Programme Manager in Post Office Limited's security team. Do you remember working with him?
I don't really know.
Now, I think it's important to make one clarification here before we move on. You'll see there's a recipient list on the right, and in the CC column it says David X. Smith. The inquiry understands that's not you.
Correct. That would have been the IT, David. I know you've had a few issues with this over the course, but this is not me. No, I was David Y. Smith on the systems.
The email says, following our conference call today, below is a brief summary of the agreed activities to progress the next steps in relation to the above piece of work. You see the above piece of work is subject challenges to Horizon. Point 1, it refers to gathering information on past and present cases with reference to the Horizon challenges. Point 2 is that information security were to conduct initial investigations and provide terms of reference outlining remit and requirements to carry out full investigation. And 3, subject to agreement of 2 above, conduct full investigations into integrity issues with conclusions report provided. Once investigated and conclusions drawn, gain external verification to give a level of external gravitas to the response to these challenges. That can come down, thank you. Were you aware that Post Office had considered conducting full investigations in response to challenges to Horizon integrity in February 2010?
No.
It's clear, isn't it, that those challenges hadn't been resolved by the time you joined as Managing Director?
It is now. I'm not sure that it was when I joined.
Why do you think you weren't briefed on or told about the, that plan to do an investigation?
I don't know.
I want to move on to look at Horizon Online now, please. Can we look at your witness statement, page 5, paragraph 11? You said the board was responsible for the rollout of the upgrade of Horizon to Horizon Online, and therefore this was ultimately my responsibility. I feel important to point out that in light of the major issues facing the business outlined above, my primary focus was on keeping the business afloat in a financially precarious time, and as a result of this, and the fact that the rollout was already underway, Horizon Online was a lower priority. I want to explore that. Could we look, please, at POL then 401615? This is described as a weekly highlight report. It says Forward 1 to 11 programme at the top. And it's for the period 9th of April to 15th of April, so when you joined. You comment on this in your witness statement. Could you just summarise briefly what this is?
Yeah, there's a change programme that was running through the business called Forward 1 to 11 was the way it was badged. Programme owner or project sponsor was myself, programme owner was Sue. This is a weekly update to us on the status of each of those programmes, one of which was the Horizon rollout. Horizon Online, I should say, sorry.
If we can go to page 3, please. It says what did not go so well this week, and Horizon Online. The Horizon Online pilot continues to run at 614 branches, but further branch migrations remain suspended due to the series of live service interruptions which have occurred since 26 March. And it continues. So you were aware of issues with the Horizon online rollout?
Absolutely. I mean, my comment in para 11 of my statement doesn't mean I wasn't working on Horizon. I was at a couple of points, significant points. One of them is here. But relative to other priorities and time over the generality of my time in the business, it was a lower priority, but not a zero priority, a lower priority.
Could we look at page 7, please? We see here there's a form of risk registers.
Yep.
And page 11, please. Horizon Online, we see it's been given a red risk.
Yep.
There's a series of crossed out dates, which is the planned dates column, which we see the full rollout commencing has been pushed back, and then it's TBA. Could we then go back, please, to page 6? New or major risks, AEI product. And this says DVLA go live is dependent on HNGX, that's Horizon Online, implementing routers into all required branches by the date agreed with the client. So it's fair, isn't it, that the Horizon Online rollout and the delays was having effect on the business across the board?
Yes.
That document can come down now, thank you. And you were aware of those knock-on effects?
Yeah, which is why I said there were a couple of times in my tenure, this being the first of them, where Horizon got high on the priority list. And the challenge here was that we'd rolled out about 600, I think, something like that, sites, and they were experiencing problems with freezing screens, which meant that it was trade affecting, so they were not able to transact in the way that they should be able to in a timely manner. We were very well aware that if we could not fix that problem relatively quickly, we would have to roll back to the legacy system. And during the course of my first couple of weeks in the business, I had conversations with senior people inside Fujitsu to understand the problem, the fix, the timetable, and to press upon them the importance of correctly fixing or giving us a view that we could roll back, because we needed to be one or the other. We couldn't have a number of sites that were unable to trade normally.
So we'll look at those discussions in a moment, but is your evidence that at the start Horizon Online was a higher priority?
Higher, yes. It still wouldn't have been the number one priority even at that point. It would have been higher because other people in the business were dealing with that on a day-to-day basis. Mike Young, for example, who was running the rollout program.
Could we look at FUJ, then 2 zeros, 174292? And if we could go down so that the email just below is in view. Thank you. So this is an email from Gavin Bounds to Roger Gilbert. And it's on the 9th of April 2010. And it refers to Duncan spoke with the new CEO, David Smith, this morning.
Yep.
Duncan Tate.
I assume so. Obviously, this was a Fujitsu email, so I'd never seen this before you presented it to me. But I assume so.
And if it is Duncan Tate, he was managing director of the private sector division of Fujitsu at that time.
I certainly spoke to senior people in Fujitsu at that time. I can't recall exactly who it was.
It refers to it says a constructive session, I believe, of course, focused on the issues of the last 2 weeks. I think you may have already answered this, but can you recall this specific phone call?
I can recall it. I can recall feeling reassured from the call.
Why did you feel reassured?
Because they'd identified what the issue was.
So when you say the issue, what issue are you?
As in why the account was freezing. They had a clear plan of action to fix it. And on that basis, assuming that that were to take place, then we would have been back in a sensible place to continue the rollout. And in fact, that's what ultimately happened.
At the bottom, you can see an email that is sent which prompts this reply. And that email says, "What's the latest on our relationship with the post office?" What was your view of the relationship between Fujitsu and the post office at this time?
My view was that at a strategic level, the two parties were comfortable. At an operational level, there was certainly pressure to identify and fix this particular problem. And we had explored internally, what options had we got to put additional pressure on them to make sure that it had the right resource and appropriate focus to get it fixed. So at a strategic level, fine. At an operational level, at that point, there were probably tensions between the two groups.
Back to the email we looked at first, after the constructive session, it said, but ended with the CEO saying, "Once we have these issues sorted, we should meet and discuss futures." Do you think that's something you would have said?
I might not have said it exactly in those words, but I certainly would have wanted to build a strategic relationship with Fujitsu as a major partner of the business. That would be typical in any role. So I'd have expected to be seeing them maybe a couple of times a year at a board-to-board type level. And so that probably would have been what he reflects back here.
That can come down, thank you. Can we turn then please to FUJ 20142190? And if we can go down to show the sender, please. Apologies, catching up in my paper bundle. That letter is from Alan Dalvarez, sent on the 8th of April 2010. So a day before the conversation we referred to. Did you see this report at the time?
I don't recall ever seeing it at the time. That's not to say I didn't, but I don't recall seeing it.
So it's a draft report prepared by Fujitsu in response to a request by Post Office regarding a particular technical issue, which we can look at if we go over the page, please. It says, background, during branch trading statement. Pausing there, what does branch trading statement mean to you?
At the end of a cycle, they would print out effectively a balance to say this is what we transacted in the period.
And it refers to the trial report that allows the postmaster to check that the data is correct, and the final report, which was printed off and kept in the office. The final report was an important document, wasn't it?
I believe so.
Do you know why?
Well, I do now because I've read all of the papers. At the time, I wasn't really aware of the day-to-day mechanics of what happened in each site.
The problem description says, on the final report, the stock holding figures in the second section of the report are incorrect on the final balance. And Fujitsu went on to state that the error affected the printed final account, but not the database itself. That can come down for the time being, please. This is different from the screen freezing issue you refer to in your witness statement.
Indeed, and wasn't what I was talking to Fujitsu about. I was talking to them about screen freeze.
Were you made aware of this issue?
I don't believe so, no.
Could we look, please, at FUJ 3095628? And if we could go to page 3, please. Page two, sorry. Yeah, there we go. Thank you. So we see that this is an email from Duncan Tate on the 10th of May. It's internal to Fujitsu, so you wouldn't have seen it at the time.
Sorry, was there an answer there?
I'm sorry?
Sorry, I'm just wondering if the witness is sometimes nodding or shaking and I can't see the camera's gone.
I see. The witness neither shook his head or said, but
I didn't say anything. Was there a question?
There wasn't a question.
Okay, so
no problem. If we look at what it says, Roger, I spoke to Mike Young on Friday morning, which would be the 7th of May 2010, based on this email. He said he made the following points. The programme was reviewed at group level outside the post office by Royal Mail Board with Mike Young, Dave Smith, brackets new POMD, and the Group Legal Counsel and FD discussing options. Do you recall that meeting?
I don't specifically, I'm afraid, no.
And it states in the paragraph with the bullet points, their confidence has been knocked due to, 1, ongoing issues with Oracle stability impacting HNGX stability. Was that a matter that you were aware of?
That is what I think of as the freeze account. I think that's what that means, or that's what it meant to me at the time.
The data center outage?
I was aware there had been problems with uptime at the data center, yes.
And the outage caused by Fujitsu operator error last week, which caused...
I'm not really sure I was aware of that one.
We then looked to a series of requests that Mr. Young made. If we go down to the numbers, thank you. So based on advice from Group Legal Counsel, Mike feels he wants some assurance that the P&L for the account is sustainable over the short and long term, so they can see we can invest and provide the resources necessary to get the problems fixed. This will look like some form of an open book arrangement. Do you remember that request being made?
Not directly as in here, but context-wise, as I said earlier, we were aware that it was important for us to either move forwards or roll back because of the trade affecting issues. I was aware from the briefings I'd had that contractually we had limited options to push them to move forwards or back. And the list that we have here, I think, is our sort of considered view as to what levers might we be able to pull in order for Fujitsu to move at the speed that we were hoping that they would.